everyone. Welcome back for another episode of Music Notes. We are still in the season of Lent today, so we will be talking about a Lenten tune and text that dates back to, well, the text dates back to about the year 1000. So let's take a listen and see what we're going to talk about today. So, as you saw, the title of our music notes today, the tune you just listened to, the tune actually is called Herzliebster Jesu, and the text for that is, O dearest Jesus, and then it goes on, what law hast thou broken? Now, some of you, when you were listening to the tune, might have said, that's Holy Jesus. I know that song. Well, let me see. I wonder, do you think that, O dearest Jesus, what law hast thou broken, is the same song or the same text as Holy Jesus? Do you think they're one and the same? Well, I bet if you thought this was Holy Jesus, that you probably weren't raised in a Lutheran church. So we're going to find out. Today our music notes is going to help us figure out if this is one and the same song, or if they're two different songs, or if maybe they're a blending. All right, so as I mentioned, our text today comes from the year 1000. So it's a medieval text, and it was written in Latin. It is associated with St. Augustine. Originally, it was thought to be a St. Augustine devotion. Medieval Latin devotion. And you can actually find the text in the book called Augustine's Meditations. However, over history, different people have decided they don't really think it's attributed to St. Augustine anymore. They feel like maybe it's a compilation of several different authors, one of whom is Jean de Fécamp. Now, he was the abbot of Fécamp in Normandy, France, and he lived from the year 990 to 1079. So that's where we get the year of our text to be about 1000 or 1025. Nobody really knows, but it does go back that far in history. So, Latin text, we get this a lot. Now we fast forward into the future. We're now in the 17th century, and a German poet, pastor comes along, finds this text, and he wants to translate it, and so he does. He translates this devotion, this meditation, into German. And the person that did that, this Lutheran pastor and poet, his name is Johann Hermann. And he lived from 1585 to 1647. And he was born in Silesia, which is now Poland. And his story is interesting in that it reminds us of a Bible story, in that he was the only surviving child of 5, and his mom prayed to God and said, "Dear Lord, if you save my son, this last child that I've had, I will make sure that his life is devoted to your ministry." And so indeed, he survived, and he did go on to practice and become a pastor. As I said, he's a Lutheran pastor. However, unfortunately, he had some health issues. He had poor sight. He had a throat condition that prevented him from preaching. And then later in his life, he was a victim, as were so many, of the 30 Years' War, which took place in 1618 to 1648. But despite all of that, he becomes a pastor and a poet, and such a skilled poet that he was at such a high level, he was awarded and named the Poet Laureate in the Holy Roman Empire in 1608. So, wow, that's a big accomplishment. And that happened, that good fortune happened for him before the 30 Years' War. So, now back to our text. It's Hermann, and he takes this text, the Latin text, and translates all 15 four-line stanzas into German. So that's how we get those words for, O dearest Jesus, what law hast thou broken? But at this point, they're still in German. Now, around the same time, there's the tune, and the two of them come together in that it was first published in Berlin in 1640 by Johann Kruger. And Kruger was from Germany. He lived from 1598 to 1662. And the melody actually appears to have been adapted. So it's from something else. So it's like kind of just like Hermann founds this Latin devotion and he translates it, and Kruger finds this melody and he adapts it into what is called Herzliebster Jesu. And they're thinking the melody was originally a tune that was set for Psalm 23 in the Genevan Psalter, and that was in 1543. So it sounds like everybody's, being inspired by some music, inspired by this Latin text, and they take it, translate it, change it, so it's evolving. The tune evolved and the text is evolving. So here we are in the 17th century, and it's kind of getting its first facelift. Now Kruger, our tune writer, he attended the Jesuit College at Olmütz and the Poets' School in Regensburg, and then later he studied theology at the University of Wittenberg. So that should sound familiar. Martin Luther also studied at the University of Wittenberg, but in the future. So back to Kruger, he moved to Berlin in 1615, and he was there and he published music for the rest of his life. And then in 1622, he actually became a Lutheran cantor at the St. Nicholas Church, and he was a teacher for the Grey Cloister as well. So some Germans, of course, are responsible for adapting, creating, evolving the song that we have today. Now, Kruger and Hermann, I believe they must have known one another. It tells me that Kruger was a very significant proponent of Hermann's texts, and we actually have 5 other texts from Hermann that are in our hymnal, and one of them, Feed Thy Children, God Most Holy, is also set to a Kruger tune. And then Kruger himself has several other tunes in our hymnal as well, one of which is Now Thank We All Our God, which you would recognize, and then Jesus, Priceless Treasure. So you can look those up and you'll find the tune is by Kruger, and for Feed Thy Children, the text is by Hermann, and the tune is by Kruger. So they found each other and probably have a lot of songs that one wrote the text and then one put music to it. Now, the tune itself goes on to become famous not because of Herzliebster Jesu, or the song O Dearest, Dearest Jesus, what law hast thou broken? It is Bach, J.S. Bach, who lived from 1685 to 1750, that really makes that tune memorable. And that melody becomes famous once he has harmonized it, and then he incorporates it into he puts it 2 times in the St. John Passion, and then 3 times in the St. Matthew Passion. Now these are, works of art that Bach has put together, and actually, despite the fact that both of these settings, these Passion settings, last 2 hours long, they were written to be used as a part of the Lutheran church service. Can you imagine that? If we came to church on Sunday and 2 hours of our service was listening to the Passion, whether it's St. Matthew Passion or St. Luke's. But if you were to listen to that, you would hear the tune that we use when we sing, "O dearest Jesus, what law hast thou broken?" And so that happened in 1724. So 1724, now the tune becomes famous. And that's the tune we're singing. Now we're going to fast forward. We've been in the 17th century. We're going to go forward 200 years. We're going to go to the mid-1800s. And we're going to talk about Catherine Winkworth. If you were to look in your hymnal, you would find her name in there as well. And that's because we have her to thank for translating our text today from German into English. So a little bit about Catherine Winkworth. She was born in London, England in 1827, and then she moved around quite a lot and lived in Germany and France, and she died in France in Savoy in 1878. Catherine Winkworth is known for her German translations, or her English translations of German hymns. And she thankfully translated the entire 15 stanzas that we have. So we have Winkworth to thank for what we have in our hymnal today. She was educated initially by her mother, and she lived with relatives in Dresden, Germany. And it was there that she acquired kind of a knowledge and passion for German hymnody. She was also a pioneer in promoting women's rights, and she put a lot of her energy into the encouragement of higher education for young women. She translated a number of German hymns, as I mentioned, and then she also translated biographies of German Christians who promoted ministries to the sick and the poor. She also compiled a handbook of biographies of German hymn authors called Christian Singers of Germany. So thank you, Catherine Winkworth. Unfortunately, or fortunately, kind of depends on your perspective, a lot of her texts were altered over the years. And so that's going to bring us to the answer to our question about "O dearest Jesus" versus "Ah, holy Jesus." So let's move forward now. We're still in the 1800s. Anglican poet comes along, and his name is Robert Bridges. And he also is a translator, and he looks at this hymn text that we have, and he translates the hymn into English as well. However, unlike Catherine Winkworth, who kept all 15 verses, it is Bridges that condenses the 15 down into 5. So he takes a lot of liberty there with that original medieval Latin text and goes from 15 verses down to 5. And Bridges, he includes his translation in the 1899 Yattenden hymnal, and that hymnal has a lot of influence, major influence on 20th century hymnody. Okay, so we're kind of getting closer to our answer. But a little about Robert Bridges. He was born in 1844, lived till 1930. He was a poet laureate of England and a brilliant individual, skilled as a scholar, a translator, a musician, and a physician. So his declining health caused him to have to give up his medical career. And as a result, he turned his focus on to literature and hymnody. And rather than attempting a complete translation of the lengthy hymn that we have, those 15, he decides to paraphrase part of the hymn. And so it's those 5 stanzas that Bridges puts together that creates the hymn, Ah, Holy Jesus. So the answer to that question is, are they one and the same song? No, they're not. But they do have that source. They come from the same source, that medieval Latin devotion, St. Augustine's Meditations, but they have evolved over the year and then kind of split into 2 songs, but they both have that same tune. If you were to go to a Methodist church or probably a Presbyterian church and look in the hymnal for "O Dearest Jesus," you wouldn't find it. You would find "Ah, Holy Jesus," and you would find 5 verses. Now, thankfully, when you crack open our hymnal on page 439, you're going to find, "O dearest Jesus, what law hast thou broken?" And we get to see all 15 verses of that song. So really more of the original intent of the author is what we find in our hymnal. So while I think that's really, really neat, rarely, if ever, do we sing all 15 verses in church. So it is worthwhile to sit down and read through those verses. Now, today you're going to get that opportunity. That's going to be our sound clip at the very end of today. And while it's 15 verses, it's going to take a little time. It's well worth it. The poetry itself is beautiful, and it causes you to become very introspective. And that's important. It's a meditation during the season of Lent. And that was the original intent of the author of this text. So before we get to listening to our whole song, I want to read from Luke. Luke chapter 23, verses 18 through 25. But they all cried out together, "Away with this man, and release us Barabbas!" A man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city and for murder. Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to release Jesus. But they kept shouting, "Crucify! Crucify him!" A 3rd time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. I will therefore punish and release him." But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they asked, but he delivered Jesus over to their will. So that's Luke 23, chapters 18 through 25. And so as you're going through the song today, think about what Luke writes. Imagine that crowd. Imagine what they did. And verse 1, let's read verse 1 in our hymnal today. "O dearest Jesus, what law hast thou broken, that such sharp sentence should on thee be spoken? Of what great crime hast thou to make confession? What dark transgression?" So there's that question there. Verse 1, that is echoing exactly what we just read in Luke. It echoes Pontius Pilate's question to them, why? What evil has he done? I have found no guilt in him, nothing deserving of death. What dark transgression has Jesus done? You think one must be guilty of something just awful, of murder or insurrection, to deserve the punishment that the people are crying out for so vehemently. And then that question here, what law hast thou broken? The hymnist cries out, whether it's, let's see, Jean de Fécamp that was asking that question, or if it really was St. Augustine. They're asking that question. They're crying out, what could it be? And the answer is none, nothing. There is nothing that Jesus did. No law was broken. Jesus has no guilt deserving death, no guilt at all. And that's the deep sadness in this piece. This opening stanza is asking us to really consider the horrific travesty of the scene and wants us to understand the why. Why would he hang there and suffer such awful things? Verse 2, I'm just going to read a couple of these. Verse 2, as we'll see, is just the vivid description of Christ being crucified. They crown thy head with thorns. They smite, they scourge thee. With cruel mockings to the cross they urge thee. They give thee gall to drink. They still decry thee. They crucify thee. So again, just the vivid reality of what happened. It's awful, and it's, again, something that we should think about because it's horrific, but it was done for such purpose. It's stanza 3 that moves this forward. Stanza 3 reads on, whence come these sorrows? Whence this mortal anguish? Is it my sins for which thou, Lord, must languish? Yea, all the wrath, the woe thou dost inherit, this I do merit. And so stanza 3, that question, whence comes these sorrows? Whence this mortal anguish? The why? And the answer is deafening. It is for my sins. So my sins are the reason for the sorrows, for the anguish, for the torture. My sins put him on the cross. It is for my sins that the most truly innocent man suffered and died. For my sins and for yours. So it goes on to describe to whom this has happened, to Jesus, to whom the Bible makes it absolutely clear Jesus is without spot or blemish. He is perfectly pure. And we read that in Hebrews 4, verse 15, and it reads, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. So Jesus is blameless, spotless, perfect, yet he goes to that cross and suffers that pain for our sins, for you and for me. And then finally, in the final stanzas of the hymn, and after that, there's 12 more, go on really to call for personal introspection and to think about, the why, the how, the why. Thinking it calls for us to think about how can we repay for what we've done. Specifically in verse 11, it says, to crucify desires that still entice me. To all good deeds, oh, let thy Spirit win me. And so how can we do our best? How can we atone for these sins? Well, in here it tells us to crucify those desires that the devil is always enticing us with, and to fill ourselves, let the Holy Spirit in so that we can put up that armor and protect ourselves. And then finally, what can we do to atone for these sins? Nothing. There is nothing we can do. But wait, there is something. All Jesus asks of us is what? He wants us to believe. Believe in our Savior Jesus Christ. For that belief, the author writes in chapter 15, "And when, dear Lord, before thy throne in heaven, to me the crown of joy at last is given, where sweetest hymns thy saints forever raise thee, I too shall praise thee." So there is something, again, why did Jesus die on that cross for us after he was forsaken by us? He did it for us so that ultimately one day we can be with him in heaven. So do not let Christ's sacrifice and suffering and death be for naught. He died for you, he died for me, and he died so that one day we will be in heaven with him. What a blessing. So we're going to run through the hymn, all 15 verses, and just as you are listening to the singer and you see the words there, just think about what they mean. Just again, the amazing sacrifice our God in heaven made for us so that we could, be with him, which is what he wanted in the very beginning. When he created Adam and Eve, he wanted to walk with them in the garden. And this is how he is putting things right, through the sacrifice of his son, so that we can be together with God in heaven. So what an amazing love that is. Thank you so much for watching today. Bye-bye.
Oh, dearest Jesus, what hast thou broken? That such sharp sentence should on thee be spoken. Of what great crime hast thou to make confession? earthly pleasures, heedless I was trying, while thou wert dying. Almighty King, no time can dim thy glory. How shall thy splendor 'tis